Dr. David Rodriguez never thought his morning coffee would be interrupted by the end of the world as he knew it. He was sitting in his small office at the Global Space Research Center, looking at star charts on his computer screen, when every phone in the building started ringing at once. The news spread faster than wildfire. Strange ships had appeared in Earth's sky overnight, not just one or two, but hundreds of them, hanging motionless above every major city on the planet. They weren't attacking or communicating. They were just there, waiting like silent guardians made of silver and light. David rushed to the main conference room where his colleague, Dr. Lisa Park, was already setting up the emergency communication system. She looked pale and worried as she worked on the computers. Other scientists and government officials were arriving by the minute, all talking in hushed, nervous voices. "How big are they?" David asked, staring at the images on the giant screen. "Each ship is about 3 miles long," Lisa replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "The largest one is positioned directly above New York. It's beautiful and terrifying. At the same time, the ships look nothing like the flying saucers from old movies. These vessels seemed to be made of a material that shifted between silver and blue, almost like they were alive. They had elegant curves and patterns that reminded David of seashells or flower petals. Despite their massive size, they moved through the sky with the grace of dolphins swimming through water. President Williams arrived within the hour, along with leaders from other countries joining through video calls. The room buzzed with activity as translators, military advisors, and scientists all tried to make sense of the situation. David found himself pushed to the front of the room, not because he was important, but because he was one of the few people who had spent his entire career thinking about what contact with aliens might look like. For 6 hours, they waited. The why. Ships remained silent, ignoring all attempts at communication. Radio signals, light patterns, mathematical sequences. Nothing got a response. Some people on the streets below were panicking, but most were just standing there, looking up at the sky in wonder. Then, at exactly 3:47 p.m. Eastern Time, every television, radio, and internet-connected device on Earth displayed the same image. The screens flickered once, twice, and then showed something that made everyone in the room gasp. She was beautiful in a way that didn't seem quite real. Her skin had a soft blue glow, like moonlight on water. Her hair flowed around her shoulders, as if she were underwater, shifting from silver to white to the palest blue. She was tall and elegant, wearing what looked like armor made of the same material as her ships. But it was her eyes that caught David's attention, ancient, wise eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe. "People of Earth," she said, and her voice was like music mixed with thunder. Every person on the planet heard her speaking in their own language, as if she were talking directly to them. "I am Queen Zara of the Zephyrian Empire. Do not be afraid. We come not as conquerors, but as protectors of peace throughout the galaxy." The room was so quiet that David could hear his own heartbeat. The Queen continued speaking, and with each word, the reality of the situation became more incredible. "Your world stands at a crossroads. Your technology has advanced to the point where you can reach other star systems. This is a moment of great celebration, but also great danger. Throughout the galaxy, we have seen many civilizations reach this point. Some use their new power wisely and join the greater community of worlds. Others—" She paused, and her expression grew sad. "Others allow their aggressive nature to destroy themselves and threaten innocent civilizations." David felt his mouth go dry. He had written papers about this exact scenario. What would happen when humanity became capable of interstellar travel? He had always hoped it would be a moment of triumph, not judgment. The Queen's image seemed to look directly at him through the screen, though he knew that was impossible. "We have studied your species for many years. You have great potential for both creation and destruction. Your art, Your music, your stories about the stars show a beauty of spirit that we admire. But your history of conflict concerns the Galactic Council. Lisa grabbed David's arm. "This is really happening," she whispered. "We're being evaluated by aliens." Queen Zara raised her hand, and the background behind her changed to show images of space. Not the empty black that humans knew, but space filled with lights, cities, and ships. An entire galactic civilization that Earth had never known existed. The Council has debated your fate for cycles beyond your counting. Some believe your species should be contained to your solar system until you learn to live in peace. Others argue for more direct intervention. But I have seen something in your people that gives me hope. The image shifted again, showing what looked like academic papers and research documents. David's heart nearly stopped when he recognized his own work among them. His theories about how star systems formed communities, how gravitational forces created harmony rather than chaos. Dr. David Rodriguez of the Terra Institute, the Queen, said, and suddenly every eye in the room was on him. "Your research into stellar mechanics reveals an understanding that goes beyond mere science. You see the connections between all things, the delicate balance that holds the universe together. This is wisdom that my people value above all else." David's legs felt weak. He had spent his life as a quiet researcher, studying stars from millions of miles away. Now he was somehow the center of the biggest moment in human history. The Queen's expression became more personal, more vulnerable. "I have watched your species, Dr. Rodriguez, and I have watched you. Your heart carries something rare, the ability to see beyond the boundaries that separate different kinds of life. In my culture, such understanding is the foundation of the deepest partnerships." The room was completely silent, except for the sound of David's rapid breathing. The Queen looked directly at him through the screen, and he felt as if she could see into his soul. "I offer humanity a path to peace and prosperity among the stars. But this path requires trust, understanding, and a bridge between our two very different kinds of life." She paused, and David could see her taking a deep breath. "Peace comes only if you marry me." The words hit the room like a physical force. Someone dropped a coffee cup. A phone clattered to the floor. David felt the world spinning around him as every person in the room stared at him in shock. "This union would not be merely symbolic," Queen Zara continued, her voice gentle but firm. "It would be a true partnership between our civilizations, proof that different species can not only coexist but thrive together. The alternative is isolation. Your world would be quarantined from the rest of the galaxy indefinitely." David tried to speak, but no words came out. His entire life had just changed in ways he couldn't begin to understand. "You have 7 of your days to consider this proposal, Dr. Rodriguez. I know it seems impossible, but I have seen into your heart through your work, and I believe you have the wisdom to understand what is truly at stake. The choice is yours, but the consequences will shape the future of your entire species." The screen flickered once more, showing the beautiful alien queen one last time. "I will be waiting for your answer. Choose wisely, for both our peoples depend upon it." Then the screens went black, leaving behind a world that had been forever changed in the span of 30 minutes. David looked around the room at the faces staring at him, some hopeful, some terrified, all looking to him for answers he didn't have. Outside, he could hear the sounds of a world trying to process the impossible. Car horns honked, people shouted, sirens wailed in the distance. But inside the conference room, there was only silence and the weight of a decision that would determine whether humanity would join the stars or remain forever alone. David's hands were shaking as he realized that the quiet life he had always known was over. In its place was a responsibility so enormous that it made his head spin. 7 days to decide not just his own fate, but the fate of every person on Earth. The alien queen's words echoed in his mind. peace comes only if you marry me. And somehow, impossibly, the future of the human race now rested on his answer. David Rodriguez hadn't slept in 36 hours. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Queen Zara's face and heard her words echoing in his mind. Peace comes only if you marry me. The phrase had become a constant loop in his thoughts, no matter what he tried to do to distract himself. His small apartment had become the center of a media storm unlike anything the world had ever seen. Outside his window, news vans lined the street like metal soldiers. Reporters with cameras and microphones crowded around his building, shouting questions whenever anyone entered or left. The police had set up barriers, but it barely helped. Every few minutes, David could hear someone calling his name from the street below. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from people he had never heard of. News networks, government officials, religious leaders, and complete strangers all wanted to talk to him. His old college roommate called to ask if this was all real. His neighbor from down the hall knocked on his door just to stare at him in amazement. Even his dentist had somehow gotten his number and left a voicemail wishing him luck. Dr. Lisa Park sat across from him at his kitchen table, surrounded by empty coffee cups and takeout containers. She had barely left his side since the Queen's announcement, helping him deal with the chaos that had taken over his life. Her laptop was open, showing news coverage from around the world. "Look at this," Lisa said, turning the screen toward him. "They're calling you everything from humanity's savior to the most important person who ever lived. Some people are treating you like a hero, others like you're about to betray the entire human race." David rubbed his tired eyes and looked at the screen. The news showed crowds of people gathered in cities across the globe. Some held signs that read, "Save humanity, say yes," while others demanded, "Don't give up our freedom." There were prayer vigils in churches, protests in parks, and heated debates on every talk show. "I never asked for any of this," David said, quietly. 3 days ago, I was just a guy who studied stars. Now everyone on Earth is watching my every move, waiting for me to make a decision that could change everything." Lisa reached over and squeezed his hand. "You know what the crazy part is? I think she chose the right person. You've always been able to see the big picture, David. Remember when we were in graduate school and everyone else was focused on their own tiny research projects? You were the one asking how everything connected, how all the pieces fit together." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. David's heart sank, thinking it was another reporter who had somehow gotten past building security. But when Lisa opened the door, they found Dr. Michael Thompson, the head of the Global Space Research Center, along with 2 people David didn't recognize. "David," Dr. Thompson said, stepping into the apartment, "these are special advisors from the United Nations. They need to speak with you about the communication protocols we've established with Queen Zara." The 2 advisors introduced themselves as Janet Kim and Robert Chen. They explained that in the past day, the Queen had agreed to limited communication sessions, but only if David was present for the conversations. She wanted to speak with him directly to help him understand what this marriage proposal really meant. "She's not like anything we expected," Janet explained, setting up a secure communication device on David's coffee table. "Her intelligence is beyond anything we can measure, but she's also surprisingly emotional. She genuinely seems to care about both our species." The device hummed to life, and within moments, Queen Zara's image appeared in the room like a hologram. Even through the projection, her presence was overwhelming. She looked exactly as she had during the global broadcast, but now she seemed more personal, more real. "Dr. Rodriguez," she said, and her voice was softer than before, almost gentle. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I know these past days have been difficult for you." David found his voice, though it came out shakier than he intended. "Your Majesty, I have to ask. Why me? There are world leaders, brilliant scientists, people much more qualified than I am to represent humanity." Queen Zara smiled, and David was struck by how human the expression looked on her alien features. "You misunderstand the nature of what I am proposing. This is not about qualifications or politics. In your research, you wrote about how star systems form communities through gravitational harmony. You described how different celestial bodies, each unique and separate, can work together to create something more beautiful and stable than any could achieve alone. She gestured, and the space around her hologram filled with images of swirling galaxies and dancing stars. This is not mere science to my people. It is philosophy, poetry, the foundation of how we understand relationships between all living things. When I read your work, I knew I had found someone who truly understood the deepest principles of unity. David stared at the cosmic display surrounding her. But marriage? That's such a human concept. How can it mean the same thing to your people? In Zephyrian culture, what you call marriage is the ultimate collaboration, Queen Zara explained. It is when two minds become one while remaining two, when separate beings choose to share not just their lives but their very essence. It creates a bond that transcends the physical realm and touches the fabric of the universe itself. She moved closer to the projection, and David could see something vulnerable in her ancient eyes. I have ruled my empire for over 300 of your years. I have seen civilizations rise and fall, watched species make choices that led to greatness or destruction. But I have never formed the deep bond that would make such a marriage possible. Until I studied your work and saw the depth of understanding in your mind. Lisa leaned forward. What would this marriage actually involve? Would David have to leave Earth? No, Queen Zara replied immediately. The purpose is to create a bridge between our worlds. David would spend time in both places, learning our ways while teaching us about humanity. Our bond would allow our peoples to understand each other in ways that simple diplomacy never could. David felt his head spinning with the implications. And if I say no? The Queen's expression grew sad. Then the Galactic Council will vote to quarantine your world. Humanity will be confined to this solar system indefinitely. You will be alone, among the stars, cut off from the vast community of civilizations that spans the galaxy. It is not punishment, it is protection, both for you and for others. But it means your species will never reach its full potential. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the weight of her words. David looked around at the faces of his friends and colleagues, all watching him with a mixture of hope and fear. Can I ask you something personal? David said finally. Are you doing this just to save humanity, or is there something more? Queen Zara's image flickered slightly, as if the question had surprised her. I have spent centuries surrounded by advisors and subjects, but I have been essentially alone. When I discovered your work, when I saw how your mind works, I felt something I had never experienced before. The possibility of true companionship with someone who could understand both the science and the poetry of existence. She paused, and for a moment she looked almost fragile despite her power. So yes, there is something more. I am offering to save your species, but I am also hoping that perhaps in time we might save each other from the loneliness that comes with carrying such great responsibility. David felt his heart racing. This wasn't just about politics or survival anymore. There was a real person behind all the cosmic power, someone who was taking an enormous risk of her own. I need more time to think, David said quietly. Of course, Queen Zara replied. You have 4 more days, but know this, whatever you decide, I will respect your choice. I will not force this bond, for it would be meaningless if it were not freely given. The hologram faded, leaving the room feeling strangely empty. David sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by everything he had learned. Outside, the crowds continued their vigils and protests, waiting for an answer that would determine the future of the human race. What are you thinking? Lisa asked softly. David looked out the window at the alien ships hanging in the sky, beautiful and patient. I'm thinking that sometimes the biggest decisions in life come disguised as impossible choices. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the impossible might be exactly what the world needs. The weight of 7 billion people's future pressed down on his shoulders, but for the first time since this all began, David felt like he might actually be able to carry it. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday. Elena was sitting in her office at the International Institute for Extraterrestrial Studies, reviewing research proposals from scientists around the world. She had her usual cup of coffee steaming beside her computer, and the crystal pendant she always wore was resting comfortably against her chest under her professional blazer. Then her assistant burst through the door without knocking, something that had never happened in the 5 years Elena had known her. "Dr. Vasquez, you need to see this right now," she said, her voice shaking with excitement and fear. "Every telescope on Earth is picking up the same thing. They're here." Elena's coffee cup slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor, but she barely noticed. She had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, yet nothing could have made her ready for the reality of it. Through her office window, she could see people gathering in the streets, all looking up at the sky with expressions of wonder and terror. The ships appeared gradually, like mirages becoming solid. First, there were just shadows against the blue sky, then metallic gleams reflecting sunlight, and finally massive vessels that were clearly not from Earth. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Sleek silver craft that seemed to float without any visible means of propulsion. Within hours, every government on Earth was in emergency session. Military forces were placed on high alert. Though everyone knew that any species capable of traveling between stars would have technology far beyond human weapons. The most important question was not whether humanity could fight these visitors, but whether they would need to. Elena found herself at the center of the chaos. As the world's leading expert on extraterrestrial contact protocols, she was immediately appointed as humanity's chief representative for first contact negotiations. Presidents and prime ministers who had never spoken to her before were suddenly calling her personal phone, asking for advice on how to handle the most important moment in human history. The aliens sent a message to every communication device on Earth simultaneously. The translation was simple and direct. "We request diplomatic discussion. Prepare representatives for neutral meeting. We will provide safe location." Elena worked with a team of the world's best diplomats, linguists, and scientists to prepare for the negotiations. Everyone was nervous, but Elena felt something else, a strange sense of familiarity that she could not explain. Something about the alien ships reminded her of that crash site in the Amazon jungle 25 years ago. The aliens constructed a space station in Earth's orbit within just 3 days. The speed and precision of their technology was incredible to watch. The station was a work of art as much as engineering. Crystalline structures that seemed to grow rather than being built, connected by bridges that looked like they were made of solid light. Elena led a delegation of 12 people to the space station. As their shuttle approached the alien construction, she felt her crystal pendant growing warm against her skin. She had worn it for so many years that she usually forgot it was there, but now it seemed to pulse with energy that matched her accelerating heartbeat. The interior of the alien station was unlike anything humans had ever seen. The walls seemed to be alive, shifting colors and patterns in response to the visitor's presence. The air was perfectly breathable, and artificial gravity made movement comfortable, but everything felt subtly different from Earth technology. They were led to a conference room that adapted itself to accommodate both human and alien physiology. Chairs molded themselves to the perfect shape for each person, and the lighting adjusted to be comfortable for human eyes. Elena was impressed by the thoughtfulness, though she noticed that everything felt somehow clinical and cold. When the alien delegation arrived, Elena's first impression was disappointment. The beings appeared to be wearing some sort of advanced holographic disguise that made them look like generic humanoid figures without distinct features. Their voices came through translation devices that made them sound emotionless and artificial. The Lead alien spokesperson introduced their group as representatives of the Viridian Empire. They explained that humanity had been observed for some time and was now being evaluated for potential membership in something called the Galactic Collective. The terms they described sounded reasonable on the surface, but Elena noticed troubling undertones. The Viridians kept talking about compliance assessments and cultural adjustment periods that sounded more like ultimatums than negotiations. They wanted extensive information about human military capabilities, resource availability, and population distribution. When Elena asked about mutual benefits and what the Viridians hoped to gain from the relationship, their answers were vague and unsatisfying. What bothered Elena most was the behavior of one particular alien who never spoke during the meetings. This figure clearly held authority over the others. When they gestured, the other aliens immediately paid attention, and several times Elena saw them giving subtle signals that changed the direction of the conversation. There was something about this silent leader's posture and movements that triggered memories Elena could not quite access. The way they tilted their head when listening, the graceful way they moved their hands, even their breathing pattern seemed familiar. Elena found herself staring at the figure more often than was probably diplomatic. The negotiations continued. For several days, with both sides meeting in the space station conference room for hours at a time. Elena grew increasingly frustrated with the Viridians' approach. They seemed to view the talks as a formality before imposing their will rather than a genuine attempt to build mutual understanding. During breaks in the formal sessions, Elena often walked around the station's observation areas, looking down at Earth and trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, but these first representatives of galactic civilization seemed cold and calculating rather than the wise, compassionate beings she had always hoped to meet. The breakthrough moment came during the most important session yet, the meeting that would determine Earth's final status in relation to the Galactic Collective. Elena had prepared her most persuasive arguments about humanity's potential contributions to galactic civilization and their desire for peaceful cooperation. But just as she was about to begin her presentation, alarms started blaring throughout the space station. Emergency lights flashed, and the artificial gravity began fluctuating in dangerous waves. Elena's universal translator announced that a critical life support system had failed, and toxic gases were beginning to flood the conference chamber. Human delegation immediately moved toward the emergency exits. But Elena noticed that the alien representatives seemed confused by the station's safety procedures. Their holographic disguises were flickering as the power systems failed, and she could see that they were starting to collapse as the poisonous atmosphere affected their breathing. Every instinct told Elena to save herself and her team. The exit was clear, and they could easily escape to their shuttle. But as she watched the aliens struggling with the toxic environment, her conscience would not let her abandon them. These might be her planet's potential enemies, but they were also living beings in danger. Elena grabbed emergency breathing apparatus from the human supplies and rushed back into the poisoned chamber. Her team shouted for her to stop, but she ignored them and began fitting oxygen masks on the collapsed aliens. The silent leader had fallen near the far wall. Their holographic disguise completely failed. As Elena knelt beside the unconscious figure and worked to clear their breathing passages, she got her first clear look at their real appearance. The face that looked up at her through the fading hologram was impossible to forget, even after 25 years. It was Zarathea. The crystal pendant around Elena's neck suddenly blazed with brilliant light, responding to the proximity of its original owner. Both women stared at each other in shock as the emergency systems restored normal atmosphere to the chamber. The scared young graduate student who had saved a dying alien in the Amazon jungle was looking into the same grateful eyes that belonged to the most powerful ruler in this part of the galaxy. In that moment of recognition, everything about the negotiations suddenly made sense to Elena. The cold, clinical approach was not how Zarathea wanted to handle first contact, but what her advisors and military commanders expected. The silent leader had been trying to guide the talks toward peaceful cooperation without directly contradicting her own people's aggressive traditions. Zarathea struggled to sit up. Her breathing still labored from the toxic exposure. When she spoke, it was not through the translation device, but in the musical tones of her own language, sounds that Elena somehow understood, even though she had only heard them briefly decades ago. "You saved me again," Zarathea whispered. "After all, these years, it is still you." The morning of the 7th day arrived with a silence that felt different from all the others. David Rodriguez woke up in his apartment and realized that for the first time in a week, his mind was completely clear. The fear, the confusion, the overwhelming pressure, all of it had settled into something else. Peace. He knew what he was going to do. Outside his window, the crowds had grown even larger. People from all over the world had traveled to be near the place where humanity's future would be decided. Some held candles, others carried signs, and many just stood quietly, looking up at the alien ships that had become as familiar as the moon and stars. Dr. Lisa Park knocked on his door at 8 in the morning, carrying breakfast and wearing an expression of barely controlled worry. "Today's the day," she said, setting down coffee and bagels on his kitchen table. "How are you feeling?" David smiled, and Lisa was surprised by how calm he looked. "I'm ready," he said simply. "I know what I need to do." "And?" Lisa asked, though something in David's expression already told her the answer. "I'm going to say yes." Lisa sat down heavily in her chair. She had suspected this was where his thoughts were leading, but hearing it out loud still felt like a shock. "David, are you absolutely sure? This isn't just about you anymore. This is about every person on Earth." David nodded, looking out the window at the peaceful alien vessels. "That's exactly why I have to do this. Lisa, I've spent the past week getting to know Queen Zara, really getting to know her. She's not some alien conqueror trying to control us. She's someone who has spent her entire life carrying the weight of responsibility for billions of people, just like I'm carrying it now for billions of humans." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She showed me things, Lisa. Technologies that could end hunger, cure diseases, give us clean energy forever. But more than that, she showed me what humanity could become if we just had the courage to grow beyond our fears." The phone rang, interrupting their conversation. It was Dr. Thompson from the research center, calling to say that world leaders were gathering for David's final decision. Presidents, prime ministers, and representatives from every nation on Earth would be watching when he gave his answer to Queen Zara. 3 hours later, David stood in the main assembly hall of the United Nations building in New York. The room was packed with the most powerful people on the planet, but somehow David felt more calm than he had since this all began. At exactly noon, the communication system activated, and Queen Zara's image appeared before the assembly. She looked different today, more formal, more regal, but David could see the nervousness in her ancient eyes. This decision was just as important to her as it was to humanity. "Dr. Rodriguez," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Have you reached your decision?" David stepped forward, feeling the weight of 7 billion people watching him. But instead of being crushed by that pressure, he felt lifted by it. He was representing not just the fears of humanity, but their hopes, their dreams, their endless capacity for growth and change. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady and clear, "I have spent this week learning about you, about your people, and about what this proposal really means. What I've discovered has changed how I see not just this situation, but how I see the future of humanity itself." He paused, looking around the room at faces filled with tension and hope. "You're not asking me to surrender or to give up what makes us human. You're asking me to help humanity take its first step into a larger universe, to prove that we're ready to be part of something greater than ourselves." Queen Zara's expression remained neutral, but David could see her hands trembling slightly. "I accept your proposal," David said, and the words seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the room. "I will marry you, not out of fear or duty, but because I believe this union represents the best hope for both our peoples to grow into something neither could achieve alone." The room erupted. Some people cheered, others gasped, and a few started crying. But David only had eyes for Queen Zara, whose face had transformed with an expression of pure joy and relief. "Thank you," she whispered, and David could hear the emotion in her voice even across the vastness of space. "Thank you for taking this leap of faith with me." The weeks that followed passed in a blur of preparation unlike anything the world had ever seen. The wedding would take place simultaneously on Earth and aboard Queen Zara's flagship, connected by technology that would create a bond between not just David and Zara, but between their two civilizations. David found himself working closely with teams of scientists, diplomats, and cultural experts from both worlds. Queen Zara had sent down advisors, beings who looked similar to her but with different skin tones and features, to help explain Zephyrian customs and traditions. "The ceremony itself is quite beautiful," explained Ambassador Keth, a tall Zephyrian, with silver skin and kind eyes. "In our culture, marriage is not just the joining of two individuals, but the creation of a new harmony that strengthens the entire community." David learned that the Zephyrian wedding ritual involved something called consciousness bridging, a temporary merging of minds that would allow him and Queen Zara to truly understand each other's thoughts and feelings. It was both thrilling and terrifying to think about. Meanwhile, the world had begun to change in ways no one had expected. The news of David's acceptance had created a wave of optimism that swept across the planet. People who had been enemies began talking about cooperation. Nations that had been on the brink of conflict started discussing peace treaties. It was as if the idea of humanity joining a galactic community had reminded everyone that they were all part of the same species, the same small blue planet floating in the vastness of space. The day of the ceremony arrived with perfect weather and a sense of anticipation that could be felt around the globe. David stood in the UN Assembly Hall, wearing a specially designed suit that incorporated both human formal wear and Zephyrian ceremonial elements. The fabric seemed to shimmer with its own light, and he felt both nervous and excited. Queen Zara appeared not as a hologram this time, but transported down in person through technology David couldn't begin to understand. Seeing her in the same room, breathing the same air, made everything feel suddenly real in a way it hadn't before. She was even more beautiful in person, but what struck David most was how nervous she looked. This powerful queen who ruled an interstellar empire was just as scared and hopeful as he was. "Are you ready?" she asked softly, taking his hand. Her touch was warm and electric, and David felt a connection that went beyond the physical. "I'm ready," he replied, and he meant it completely. The ceremony itself was unlike anything anyone had ever witnessed. Words were spoken in both English and the musical language of the Zephyrians. Lights danced around them, and David felt his consciousness gently touching Queen Zara's, not merging completely, but connecting in a way that let him feel her emotions and thoughts. In that moment, he understood everything. Her loneliness across the centuries, her genuine love for both their peoples, her hope for a future where differences became strengths rather than sources of conflict. And she felt his wonder at the universe, his deep desire to explore and understand, his commitment to helping humanity grow beyond its limitations. When the ceremony ended, David and Queen Zara, now his wife, stood before the assembled crowd as representatives of a new kind of relationship between species. The applause was thunderous, but David barely heard it. He was too busy looking into Zara's eyes and seeing the reflection of infinite possibilities. "So," she said with a smile that was both alien and completely human, "shall we begin changing? The universe?" David squeezed her hand and smiled back. "I thought you'd never ask." Outside, the alien ships began to move for the first time in a week, not to leave, but to take new positions as permanent guardians and guides for humanity's journey to the stars. The age of isolation was over. The age of wonder was just beginning. 2 years had passed since the wedding that changed the world, and David Rodriguez barely recognized the planet he now called home. Standing on the observation deck of the Luna Research Station, humanity's first permanent base on the moon, he watched the Earth spin slowly below him, its surface now dotted with the soft lights of Zephyrian technology centers that had transformed human civilization. Queen Zara, his wife, stood beside him, her hand resting gently on her growing belly. Their child would be born in 3 months, and the thought still filled David with wonder and a little bit of healthy fear. Their daughter would be the first being in the galaxy to carry the genetic heritage of both species, a living symbol of what was possible when different worlds chose to unite, rather than remain apart. "She's moving again," Zara said with a smile, placing David's hand over the spot where their baby was gently kicking. "I think she's eager to explore the universe." David felt the tiny movement against his palm and marveled at the miracle of it. "Just like her parents," he said softly. "Speaking of exploring, how did the meeting with the Galactic Council go yesterday?" Zara's expression grew more serious, though still hopeful. "Better than we dared hope. The Council has officially voted to welcome humanity as a junior member of the galactic community. Your people have exceeded every expectation for peaceful integration. The changes to Earth had been remarkable and sometimes overwhelming. The clean energy technology that Zara had shared had ended the climate crisis almost overnight. Fusion reactors, no larger than shipping containers, now powered entire cities without producing any waste or pollution. The sky was cleaner than it had been in over a century. Medical advances had been even more dramatic. Diseases that had plagued humanity for thousands of years were now easily treatable. The average human lifespan had increased by 30 years, and genetic conditions that once seemed hopeless could now be corrected before birth. David's own grandmother, who had been dying of cancer when the aliens first arrived, was now healthy and active at the age of 93. But the most important changes had been in how humans saw themselves and each other. The knowledge that they were part of a vast galactic community had put human conflicts into perspective. Wars had not completely disappeared, but they had become rare and were usually resolved through the new diplomatic methods that Zephyrian advisors had taught. To human leaders, Dr. Lisa Park, now serving as Earth's first ambassador to the Zephyrian worlds, joined them on the observation deck. She had just returned from a 6-month mission to Zephyr Prime, the capital world of Queen Zara's empire, and she was practically glowing with excitement. "David, Zara, you have to see what they're building out there," Lisa said, activating a holographic display that showed images from her trip. "The Zephyrians have designed an entire university system just for human students. They want to teach us everything: advanced mathematics, dimensional physics, biological harmony techniques that we've never even dreamed of." The hologram showed beautiful crystalline buildings floating among the clouds of a gas giant, with human and Zephyrian students working together in laboratories that looked more like art installations than research facilities. "And the best part," Lisa continued, "is that they're not just teaching us their knowledge, they're learning from us too. Our art, our music, our way of looking at problems from completely different angles. It's revolutionizing their science in ways they never expected." David smiled, remembering his early conversations with Zara about how humanity's creativity and willingness to take risks could benefit both civilizations. It was gratifying to see those theories becoming reality. "There's something else," Zara said, looking out at the Earth below them. "The Council has approved the construction of humanity's first interstellar vessel. It will be a joint project built using both human engineering creativity and Zephyrian advanced materials. The ship will be capable of reaching other star systems within your solar system's local neighborhood." David felt his heart race with excitement. "When do we start?" "The construction begins next month," Zara replied, "and the Council has requested that you serve as the ship's first captain, leading humanity's initial mission to explore worlds beyond your solar system." The idea was both thrilling and humbling. David, who had spent his entire life looking at distant stars through telescopes, would soon be able to visit them in person. But more importantly, he would be representing humanity as they took their first steps into the larger galaxy. Over the following months, as Zara's pregnancy progressed, and the new starship took shape in Earth's orbital shipyards, David found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed. The quiet scientist who had once studied stars from his small office was now one of the most recognized people in human history, married to an alien queen and about to become the father of a child who would represent the future of interspecies cooperation. The birth of their daughter was attended by doctors from both species and broadcast live to billions of viewers across multiple worlds. When little Nova, named for the stellar phenomena that created new elements and spread them throughout the universe, opened her eyes for the first time, David saw something that took his breath away. Her eyes held the wisdom of her mother's, ancient people, but they sparkled with the curiosity and wonder that defined humanity at its best. Her skin had a subtle luminescence like Zara's, but it was warm and human to the touch. She was perfectly herself, not human, not Zephyrian, but something entirely new and beautiful. "She's perfect," David whispered, holding his daughter for the first time while Zara rested in the medical bay of their ship. "She's the future," Zara said softly. "Not just for our two species, but for the galaxy itself. The Council members who were most worried about human integration have all requested to meet her. She represents proof that different kinds of life can not only coexist, but create something greater than either could achieve alone." 6 months later, David stood on the bridge of the starship New Horizons, watching as Earth grew smaller in the rear viewing screen. The ship was a marvel of combined human and Zephyrian technology, capable of traveling faster than light while maintaining the kind of comfortable, livable spaces that humans needed for long journeys. The crew was made up of volunteers from dozens of countries, along with Zephyrian advisors who would help them navigate both the physical and cultural challenges of visiting alien worlds. Their first destination was a planet in the Alpha Centauri system, where a civilization of peaceful traders had agreed to meet with humanity's first interstellar ambassadors. Nova, now 6 months old, gurgled happily in her specially designed carrier as she looked out at the stars streaming past the ship. She seemed completely comfortable with the idea of traveling between worlds, as if she had always known this was where she belonged. "Captain Rodriguez," called out Lieutenant Johnson from the navigation station, "we're approaching the Alpha Centauri system. The Centaurian Welcome Committee is requesting permission to guide us to their homeworld." David looked around the bridge at his crew. Humans and Zephyrians working together with an efficiency and harmony that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. "Grant them permission," he said. "Let's go make some new friends." As the New Horizons adjusted course toward humanity's first diplomatic contact with a third alien species, David held his daughter close and thought about the letter he had received that morning from his mother back on Earth. She had written to tell him how proud she was, not just of what he had accomplished, but of how he had stayed true to himself through all the incredible changes. "You're still the same boy who used to lie on the grass in our backyard, staring up at the stars and dreaming about what was out there," she had written. "You just finally found a way to reach them." Looking out at the alien sun growing larger, In the view screen, with his wife beside him and his daughter in his arms, David realized that his mother was both right and wrong. He was still the same person who had always wondered about the stars, but he had also become something more. A bridge between worlds, a father to the future, and living proof that sometimes the most impossible dreams could come true. The universe was vast and full of wonders beyond imagination, but it no longer felt lonely. Humanity had found its place among the stars, not as conquerors or subjects, but as partners in the greatest adventure of all, the never-ending journey to understand and connect with all the different forms of life that filled the cosmos. As the ship entered orbit around the beautiful blue-green world that would be humanity's first diplomatic destination, David smiled and whispered to his daughter, "Welcome to the universe, Nova. I have a feeling you're going to love it here."